The clatter of upscale Manhattan dining faded as Margaret Lancaster's gaze locked onto the pendant. The overhead lights danced across its surface as her manicured fingers, usually steady with the confidence of a $4 billion empire, trembled as she reached out. Where did you get this? The question escaped her lips, raspy and faint, barely audible above the soft murmur of lunchtime conversations. Jasmine, the young waitress, froze mid-step, a laden tray balanced precariously on one hand. This wasn't in the service manual. Nothing could have prepared her for this moment, for the intense scrutiny of a woman whose name echoed through the city's power corridors. A simple, almost laughably inexpensive necklace, purchased for $23, was about to pull at a thread, unraveling a mystery that had haunted one of America's wealthiest women for nearly 3 decades. Margaret Lancaster, the formidable 72-year-old CEO of Lancaster Industries, was not known for public displays of emotion. Her perfectly coiffed silver hair, the impeccable designer suit, the subtle but undeniably extravagant 3-carat diamond earrings, all broadcast a message of old money and unwavering control. She had buried a husband, crushed countless rivals in the cutthroat world of cosmetics, and never, not once, allowed anyone to witness her vulnerability. Until now, Jasmine, her name tag glinting under the soft lights of Dominique, remained motionless, pinned under the powerful gaze of this titan of industry, all focused on the delicate silver chain that adorned her neck. The pendant itself was unremarkable, a small, heart-shaped locket with a barely perceptible engraving on the back. It was the only tangible link to her past, a whisper of a life before the sterile corridors of foster homes and the impersonal confines of group facilities. She'd worn it every single day for as long as she could remember. "Ma'am, I really need to take your order," Jasmine managed, her voice a strained whisper. She'd been at Dominique for 6 months, meticulously saving every dollar earned from juggling demanding clientele and relentless shifts. This job, with its promise of financial stability, was everything. She couldn't afford to lose it over some inexplicable fixation with her meager jewelry. But Margaret seemed deaf to her plea. Her eyes remained glued to the necklace, her face leaching of color as if she had seen a ghost. The whispers started subtly, then grew. Forks paused in mid-air. Conversations faded into hushed tones. People recognized Margaret Lancaster. She was a fixture of Manhattan's elite circles. And right now she looked utterly shattered. "Please," Margaret's voice cracked, the word barely audible. "Please, tell me where you got that necklace." Jasmine shifted uneasily. Her manager, Robert, a man whose presence usually radiated controlled calm, was already approaching their table, his expression a mask of barely concealed concern. Robert ran Dominique's with the precision of a military operation. He had made it abundantly clear during Jasmine's interview that wealthy clients were never to be disturbed, never questioned. They were to be indulged with silent efficiency and practiced smiles. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Lancaster?" Robert asked, his voice a soothing balm as he placed himself between the billionaire and his trembling waitress. "I apologize if there has been any inconvenience." "I need to speak with her," Margaret said, dismissing Robert with a wave of her hand. "Alone, please." A palpable silence descended upon the restaurant. Every eye was now focused on their table, forks suspended over half-eaten entrees. Margaret Lancaster, the epitome of composure and grace, was openly weeping. Actual tears carved glistening paths through her flawlessly applied makeup. Jasmine's heart hammered against her ribs. She was utterly clueless. The necklace had been with her since she was an infant, abandoned in a sterile hospital bathroom in Newark. It was her only identifier, the sole memento her unknown parent had left behind. For 27 years, it had been a constant, nagging reminder that someone, somewhere hadn't wanted her. "Mrs. Lancaster, perhaps we should move this conversation to my office?" Robert suggested, his tone a carefully calibrated mix of professional concern and thinly veiled desperation. The last thing he needed was a scene that spread through social media like wildfire. Already, he noticed at least 3 diners discreetly recording the unfolding drama on their phones. Margaret rose abruptly, the legs of her chair scraping against the polished marble floor. She reached into her Hermes bag and extracted a thick wad of $100 bills, tossing them carelessly onto the table without bothering to count. "Keep the change," she snapped at Robert, her voice trembling with an urgency he'd never witnessed. Then, turning back to Jasmine, she pleaded, "Please, I'm begging you. 5 minutes of your time. That's all I ask." Jasmine's gaze darted to her manager. Robert's jaw was clenched tight, but he gave a barely perceptible nod. 5 minutes. In the back office. The short walk through the restaurant felt like an agonizing eternity. Every eye burned into her back, judging, scrutinizing. Jasmine was just a waitress, a nobody. Margaret Lancaster was royalty. Whatever this was about, she knew instinctively that it wouldn't be good. The office was small and claustrophobic, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee and anxiety. A cluttered desk, piled high with invoices and reservation books, dominated the space. Margaret closed the door, shutting out the curious stares, and turned to face Jasmine. Her hands were visibly shaking. "That necklace," Margaret began, her voice thick with emotion. "I gave it to my daughter 27 years ago." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Jasmine felt the blood drain from her face. I don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Margaret reached into her purse again, this time retrieving her smartphone. With trembling fingers, she navigated through her photo gallery until she found what she was desperately seeking. She held the screen out for Jasmine to see. The photograph depicted a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, with long, dark hair and sparkling eyes. She was laughing at something just outside the frame, her hand resting protectively on a prominently pregnant belly. And around her neck, glinting in the sunlight, was a necklace identical to the one Jasmine wore. "Her name was Caroline," Margaret said softly, her voice laced with a grief that seemed to stretch back decades. "My daughter, my only child." Jasmine stared at the image, a strange sense of familiarity washing over her. Or was she simply seeing what she desperately wanted to see? A connection to someone, anyone, from the void of her past? What happened to her? Margaret's face crumpled, the carefully constructed mask of composure finally shattering. "She died in childbirth 27 years ago, at a hospital in Newark. There were complications." She trailed off, swallowed hard, and forced herself to continue. The baby survived, but Caroline didn't make it." Another pause, as she struggled to regain control. "I was traveling in Europe when it happened. By the time I got back to New York, they told me the baby had been adopted. The agency said it was a private adoption already finalized. I tried everything, hired investigators, lawyers, but the trail went cold." The small office seemed to shrink, pressing in on Jasmine, stealing her breath. "You're saying," Jasmine stammered, struggling to process the enormity of what she was hearing. "I'm saying that necklace belonged to my daughter," Margaret interrupted, her voice gaining strength, regaining its familiar steeliness. "And the only person who should have it is her child, my grandchild." Jasmine's legs buckled beneath her. She sank into the nearest chair, her mind reeling, unable to grasp the sheer improbability of it all. Things like this didn't happen in real life. She was nobody, just another statistic, a forgotten face lost in the labyrinthine foster care system. "I was never adopted," Jasmine said, her voice barely a whisper. "I grew up in foster care. They found me in a hospital bathroom. Someone had left me there with just that necklace and a blanket." Margaret's expression shifted from desperate hope to stark horror. "A bathroom? You were found in a bathroom?" "Newark General," Jasmine confirmed, her voice trembling. 27 years ago, March 15th. Margaret pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes widening in disbelief. That's the hospital where Caroline died. March 15th was the day she gave birth. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was grotesque, a twisted mockery of hope and reconciliation. Jasmine had spent her entire life plagued by the question of why she had been abandoned, conjuring elaborate narratives of impossible choices and desperate circumstances. But this was something far more sinister. "Someone took you," Margaret whispered, the realization dawning in her eyes. "Someone at that hospital took you and left you in that bathroom. They stole you from me." Tears streamed down Jasmine's face, blurring her vision. "Now, why would someone do that?" "Because you were worth millions," Margaret said, her voice laced with bitterness. "As my sole heir, you would inherit everything." She paused, her gaze hardening. "Caroline wasn't married. The father was never in the picture. That meant you were my only grandchild, my only living family. Someone must have thought they could profit from making you disappear." The enormity of it all crashed over Jasmine like a tidal wave. She had grown up in poverty, shuffled between indifferent foster homes, where she was nothing more than a line item on a budget spreadsheet. She had worn cast-off clothes from thrift stores and subsisted on donated food. She had worked multiple jobs to scrape together enough money for community college. And all that time she had a grandmother, a family, a fortune that should have been hers. "We need proof," Jasmine said, forcing herself to think rationally, to cling to the last vestiges of disbelief. "We can't just assume, based on a necklace." Margaret nodded vigorously, her eyes burning with a fierce determination. "DNA test. We can do it right now. I have a lab on retainer. They can rush the results." "But even if it's true," Jasmine continued, her voice cracking, "how do we find out who did this? It's been 27 years. Margaret's expression hardened, the grief momentarily receding, replaced by a chilling resolve. "We find them," she said simply, "and we make them pay." What neither woman knew was that the person responsible was far closer than they could possibly imagine. Robert, the ever-vigilant manager, had been eavesdropping at the door, his face paling with each horrifying revelation. 27 years ago, he had been a young, desperate nurse at Newark General, drowning in gambling debts with no apparent way out. A nurse who had been approached by a woman with a chilling proposition, promising him $50,000 to make a newborn baby disappear. He had told himself it would be all right, a victimless crime. The baby would be found, taken in by a loving family. He would pay off his debts and never gamble again. But things had spiraled out of control with terrifying speed. The baby had been left in that cold, sterile bathroom for hours before anyone found her. By then, Robert had already fled New Jersey, abandoning his old life, hoping to bury the guilt and terror that gnawed at his conscience. And now, that baby was serving tables in his restaurant, and her grandmother, one of the most powerful women in America, was on the verge of uncovering his darkest secret. Robert's hands trembled as he fumbled for his phone. He needed to call someone, anyone. He needed help. But who could help him now? The woman who had orchestrated the entire scheme, the one who had promised him immunity, was long dead, having taken her secrets to the grave 15 years ago. Except she hadn't. Hidden away in a safe deposit box in a Manhattan bank was a letter, a meticulously detailed confession his contact had insisted he keep as insurance. At the time, he had believed it protected him. Now, he realized it was his death warrant. Inside the office, Margaret was already making calls, her voice a whirlwind of commands and demands. Within the hour, a private DNA testing service had discreetly arrived at the restaurant. Within 3 hours, preliminary results were in. And within 6 hours, it was confirmed beyond any doubt. Jasmine Torres was, in fact, Jasmine Lancaster, the missing heir, the stolen baby, the granddaughter who had been presumed lost forever. The news detonated like a seismic event. By morning, every major news outlet was running the story. "Billionaire's missing heir found working as waitress," screamed the headlines. "DNA test confirms restaurant worker is Lancaster fortune heir. 27-year mystery of stolen baby solved." But Margaret wasn't interested in the media circus. She was focused on justice. She hired the most ruthless, resourceful investigators money could buy. She demanded that the hospital turn over every dusty record from 27 years ago. She subpoenaed bank statements, employment files, even fragments of security footage that should have been erased decades ago but somehow lingered in forgotten archives. Slowly, methodically, the truth began to surface. The nurse who had been on duty the night Caroline Lancaster died. The mysterious $50,000 deposit into an account that had remained dormant for years. The gambling debts that had threatened to consume Robert. And the enigmatic woman who had paid for everything, her identity shrouded in a web of shell corporations and deceased lawyers. Robert tried to flee, but Margaret's security team intercepted him at JFK Airport. There was no violence, no shouting, just cold, ruthless efficiency. A hand on his elbow, a whispered invitation, a waiting car that whisked him away to a place from which escape was impossible. The woman who sat across from him in the back of the limousine bore little resemblance to the weeping matriarch he had seen in the restaurant. Her face was a mask of controlled fury, her eyes radiating a chilling intensity. "I want names," Margaret said, her voice a low, menacing rasp. "Everyone involved. Every person who knew. Every person who helped. Every person who stayed silent." Robert crumbled. He confessed everything. He told her about Victoria Ashford, Margaret's supposed business partner at the time, who had systematically been embezzling funds from Lancaster Industries and desperately needed Margaret distracted. He revealed how Victoria had coldly calculated that the disappearance of the baby would utterly destroy Margaret, leaving Victoria free to seize control of the company. It had almost worked. Margaret had spent years drowning in grief, a shadow of her former self. The company had teetered on the brink of collapse. Victoria had come within inches of launching a hostile takeover. But Margaret had somehow found the strength to survive. She had rebuilt her life, reclaimed her company. And Victoria had died in a fiery car accident 15 years ago, seemingly taking her secrets to the grave. Except those secrets were now being unearthed, dragged kicking and screaming into the light. And with them came irrefutable evidence of a vast network of crimes. Embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy. Victoria might be dead, but she had left behind a cadre of willing accomplices, people who had profited from stolen money and a stolen child. Margaret vowed to hunt them all down. She didn't just want financial restitution. She wanted criminal prosecution. She wanted prison sentences. She wanted everyone who had played even the smallest role in stealing her grandchild to face the full force of the law. The district attorney initially resisted, citing the age of the crimes, the scarcity of evidence, the unreliability of witnesses. But Margaret Lancaster didn't accept no for an answer. She unleashed every ounce of her wealth and influence, hiring the most skilled attorneys, generating relentless media pressure, making it politically impossible for the DA to ignore her demands. The trial stretched on for 6 grueling months. Robert testified against his former accomplices in exchange for a reduced sentence. He received 15 years. The accountant who had helped Victoria conceal the stolen funds received 12. The lawyer who had falsified the adoption records was disbarred and sentenced to 10. 3 other individuals were convicted of conspiracy and fraud. The hospital, exposed for its negligent oversight, was forced to pay a settlement of $20 million. And every person who had known something but remained silent faced professional repercussions that shattered their careers and reputations. But the legal victories, however satisfying, could never fully compensate for the 27 years of stolen time. They couldn't give Jasmine back the childhood she had been robbed of, couldn't erase the trauma of foster care, the loneliness, the gnawing sense of not belonging. Margaret, acutely aware of the limitations of justice, focused on what she could control, the future. She brought Jasmine into her home, into her family, into her life, not as a replacement for Caroline, but as her own unique and precious person. She paid for Jasmine to complete her nursing degree at Columbia University. She introduced her to Lancaster Industries, not with pressure or expectation, but with genuine curiosity about her dreams and aspirations. And Jasmine, for the first time in her life, had real choices. She could pursue her passion for nursing. She could join the family business. She could travel the world. She could do anything her heart desired. She chose to start a foundation, the Caroline Lancaster Foundation, named in honor of the mother she never knew. Its mission was simple but profound: to reform the foster care system, to ensure that no child slipped through the cracks the way Jasmine had, to provide vulnerable children with the resources, support, and oversight they desperately needed. Margaret seeded the foundation with an initial endowment of $50 million. Within a year, they had placed over 300 children in permanent, loving homes. Within 2 years, they had successfully lobbied for legislation that tightened hospital security protocols and created more comprehensive tracking systems for newborns. 6 months after the trial concluded, Jasmine stood at a podium in front of a packed auditorium, poised to announce the foundation's latest initiatives. She wore a stylish business suit that Margaret had helped her choose, and around her neck, she still wore that simple silver necklace. "My name is Jasmine Lancaster," she began, her voice clear and resolute. "And 27 years ago, I was stolen from my family and left to die in a hospital bathroom. I survived through sheer luck and the unwavering dedication of social workers who refused to let me become another statistic. But I shouldn't have had to survive. I should have been protected." The audience listened in rapt silence as she outlined the foundation's ambitious plans. New initiatives, partnerships with state agencies, comprehensive training programs for hospital staff, a national hotline for reporting suspected child trafficking or abandonment. "We can't change the past," Jasmine continued, her voice filled with conviction. "But we can shape the future. We can make sure that no other child experiences what I did. No other grandmother spends decades searching for a grandchild who was stolen. No other family is destroyed by greed and cruelty." The applause was deafening, a thunderous wave of support. But Jasmine wasn't doing this for applause. She was doing it because she understood something profound that her grandmother had taught her. That power was meaningless if it wasn't used to help others. Margaret watched from the front row, tears streaming freely down her face. But these were not tears of grief or rage. They were tears of overwhelming pride. Her granddaughter, the baby she had thought lost forever, had not only survived but had thrived, and together, they were changing the world, one child at a time. The media coverage of the foundation was extensive and transformative. News outlets that had initially sensationalized the story as tabloid fodder now published serious, in-depth articles on foster care reform and child protection. Politicians took notice. Donations poured in from around the globe. Other wealthy families, inspired by the Lancasters' example, launched their own philanthropic initiatives. But the most meaningful moments were the quiet ones, like when Margaret and Jasmine visited a foster care facility and saw the joy on the children's faces, like when they received handwritten letters from families who had been reunited because of the foundation's work, like when they sat together in Margaret's elegant penthouse, poring over old photographs of Caroline, and Jasmine finally learned about the mother she had never known. "She would be so proud of you," Margaret said one evening, her voice thick with emotion. "Caroline always wanted to help people. She was studying to be a doctor when she found out she was pregnant. She planned to continue her studies after you were born. She had so many plans." Jasmine squeezed her grandmother's hand, her heart aching with a bittersweet mix of sadness and connection. "Tell me more about her." And Margaret did. She shared cherished stories about Caroline's childhood, her stubborn determination, her infectious laugh, her utter ineptitude in the kitchen. She showed Jasmine home videos and heartfelt letters, bringing Caroline to life, transforming her from a tragic figure into a vibrant, multifaceted person. "I wasted so many years being angry," Margaret confessed, her voice laced with regret. "After Caroline died and you disappeared, I became hard, cold. I built walls around myself because I couldn't handle any more loss. But those walls also kept out joy, connection, love." "You're making up for it now," Jasmine said gently, her eyes filled with love and understanding. Margaret smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that radiated warmth and peace. "We both are." The necklace that had sparked the extraordinary chain of events now occupied a place of honor in the Foundation's headquarters, preserved in a climate-controlled glass case alongside a framed photograph of Caroline. Beneath the display was a simple plaque inscribed with the words, "In memory of Caroline Lancaster, and in celebration of every child who survives against impossible odds, may we never forget their worth." Jasmine had commissioned a replica of the necklace, which she wore every day, a constant reminder of where she had come from and where she was going. Robert, serving his sentence in a minimum security prison, heard about the Foundation's remarkable work. He wrote a rambling, self-serving letter to Jasmine, filled with hollow apologies and feeble attempts at justification. She never responded. Some things couldn't be forgiven. Some actions had consequences that reverberated through eternity. He would have to live with the weight of his actions. She would have to live with the consequences of his choices, but she refused to let them define her future. The other convicted conspirators faced their own personal reckonings. The accountant lost his license and was stripped of all his assets. The lawyer was disbarred, his reputation irrevocably tarnished. They would spend their remaining years as cautionary tales, stark reminders of the devastating consequences that followed when greed triumphed over ethics. But Jasmine refused to dwell on the past. She focused instead on the children she could help, the families she could reunite, the systems she could change. Her nursing degree, which she finally completed with honors, included a specialization in pediatric care. She divided her time between working at a bustling children's hospital and overseeing the day-to-day operations of the Foundation. Margaret often joked that she possessed less energy than her granddaughter, despite being half a century older. "You got your relentless work ethic from me," Margaret would say proudly, her eyes twinkling with affection. "But your compassion, that's all, Caroline." Lancaster Industries continued to flourish under Margaret's astute leadership, but she gradually began transitioning responsibilities to a trusted management team. She craved time, precious, unhurried time. Time to spend with Jasmine. Time to make up for the decades they had lost. Time to simply be a grandmother. They embarked on a series of unforgettable trips together. Paris, the city where Caroline had been conceived, a place that held both joy and heartache. Tokyo, the bustling metropolis where Margaret had been traveling when Caroline died, a place forever marked by grief. All the places Margaret had once visited alone in her solitude, she now revisited with Jasmine, transforming them into vibrant tapestries of shared experience and renewed joy. And in every city, they sought out opportunities to expand the reach of the Foundation, forging new partnerships, launching innovative programs, and identifying new avenues for protecting vulnerable children. The extraordinary story of the billionaire and the waitress became something far larger than just a personal reunion. It evolved into a global movement, a beacon of hope and inspiration that touched countless lives. Foster care reform rose to the forefront of the national conversation, becoming a priority issue in state legislatures across the country. Hospital protocols were strengthened and streamlined. Adoption processes were scrutinized and improved. Background checks became more rigorous and comprehensive. And it all began because of a simple, almost forgotten, $23 necklace, and a grandmother who had refused to surrender hope, who had waged a relentless, decades-long battle to reclaim what had been stolen from her. 3 years after that fateful encounter in the Manhattan restaurant, Jasmine stood once again at a podium, her heart filled with gratitude and purpose. But this time, she was introducing her grandmother, who was about to receive a prestigious humanitarian award in recognition of the Foundation's extraordinary achievements. "She is the strongest person I know," Jasmine said, her voice choked with emotion. "She lost her daughter. She lost 27 years with her grandchild. She could have allowed that pain to consume her, to destroy her. Instead, she channeled her grief into something beautiful, something powerful, something that will outlive both of us and help generations to come." Margaret took the stage to a thunderous ovation. She gazed out at the sea of faces, then turned back to Jasmine and smiled, a radiant, all-encompassing smile that spoke volumes. "I learned something profoundly important," Margaret said into the microphone, her voice resonating with sincerity. "Wealth means nothing if you're alone. Power means nothing if you don't use it for good." She paused, her eyes glistening with tears. "And family? Family is everything. I would gladly give up every penny I have, every asset, every business deal, every single accomplishment, just to have those 27 years back with my granddaughter. But since I can't have that, I will dedicate every remaining moment of my life to ensuring that no other family suffers the unimaginable pain that we endured. The speech was short but deeply moving. When she finished, Margaret walked directly to Jasmine and enveloped her in a long, heartfelt embrace. The photographers captured that unforgettable moment. The billionaire and the former waitress, the grandmother and the granddaughter, two women who had been torn apart by greed and reunited by chance, or perhaps by something far more profound. It wasn't really chance, was it? It was that necklace, that seemingly insignificant piece of silver that Caroline had worn, that she had somehow managed to place around her baby's neck in those final, fleeting moments before everything went dark. That necklace had traveled through 27 years of foster homes and impersonal group facilities. It had miraculously survived being pawned, lost, or stolen. It had hung around Jasmine's neck like a beacon, waiting for the precise moment, waiting for Margaret to walk into a restaurant on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, waiting to bring a family back together. Share this story if you believe that justice can ultimately prevail, even against seemingly insurmountable odds. Hit that like button if you believe in the transformative power of never giving up, of relentlessly fighting for what's right, of using your privilege to protect the vulnerable. Subscribe for more uplifting stories that demonstrate that truth and love are ultimately stronger than greed and cruelty. Your own story of triumph could be next. Your moment of recognition could be just around the corner. Never underestimate the unwavering power of a grandmother's love, or the enduring significance of a simple necklace that carries the weight of generations. Justice may be delayed. It may demand a relentless battle against systems designed to conceal the truth. It may require immense sacrifice, unwavering persistence, and unshakable faith. But in the end, truth always finds a way to surface, and love, genuine, unconditional love, never forgets.